So when I found out that Access was held in St. John's, Newfoundland this year, I was thinking, what's the best way to get to come here? And so I worked backwards from the only way that we can come to Access is to get invited to speak. And to get invited to speak, you need to have something interesting to talk about. So what can we create that will best get us to be invited to come here, right? So over the last few years, I think there was a theme at Access in Vancouver when that's the last Access I went to, that open data was a really big thing, right? I remember Andrea Reimer came and talked about open data in the city of Vancouver. So that really struck a chord with me. I really liked how like the data that taxpayers are paying for is being given back to citizens to use for however they like. So for things like in the city of Vancouver, you would get like garbage collection schedules and maps of where garbage cans are and water fountains and things like that. So that was really made open for anyone to download and use. And I see that the city of Toronto also has open data. And I don't know if they, what type of data they have there, but it could be something related to Rob Ford or his antics. There's also some academic open data portals as well. What really inspired us is we saw that University of Waterloo had an open data API. And what they have in there is data that we can actually use ourselves if our campus had that, right? Like, open course information when, like an open course calendar. So we could have used that. And what happened to us is that we needed to, in order for the data to be usable, it has to be machine readable, not just look pretty for a human to look at. It has to be in defined formats like RDF or XML or JSON. Right, I have some examples here. So as a library, as in librarians, really champion open data, right? I've seen library data camps where librarians get together and they're looking at ways and ideas to mash up what they can do with the data out there. But as libraries ourselves, do we open or do we expose any of our own data? So I think some of the data that we have, is locked away in our shitty ILS. I won't say what vendor it is. But what we do is, screen scraping and these lousy expect scripts, TCL scripts, is how we access the data, because there's no other way to do it other than, just trying to pry it out of there. So what types of data can we open? Well, for one thing, what happened this summer was we needed to get our library course reserves data out of our ILS and into our campus learning management system, which happens to be Canvas. So I was just, trying to think of how do we get this information out of this crappy system we use, and maybe the best way was just to screen scrape and create an API out of it so that the campus LMS people can look at that feed. But instead, a better way was I started talking to Todd about how he would do it, and it turned out that he already had the reserves material exported into a Solar database, and he just built he took maybe an afternoon or a couple days, and he built an API on top of that. And then we started talking about what else can we add to this API, and this would really make a great Access talk. So we started creating the idea of an open data API for library data. And we've been adding to this. So this slide while I was doing it, is not even up to date anymore. So what we have is things like book and journal covers in one API rather than one API for book covers and one API for journals. We have an equipment availability, so you can query how many laptops are available to be loaned out at the loans counter, and it would just give you like 5 laptops. We have an hours database, which Todd will talk about. We do have an API for the patron data, but that we don't have, is not publicly available, so you can't find out what Mark has checked out. And the reserves database is what I can show you in a sec. And we did have a database for serials costs, and that data is now just being exported as JSON, so you can download our serials costs for whatever year you'd like, and upcoming library workshops as well. So the very basic use of, say, for example, the library reserves is you create a URL which has the department and the course number, and it spits back a chunk of JSON, which in our campus LMS, they know what course container you're in, and it just queries, and we give back a chunk of JSON, which they then turn into a nice list of reserves, because we send back the book covers as well. So another use is our laptop availability, and what you can just say is, you give me a count of how many laptops available, and kind of hard to read, but it'll say there's this many laptops checked out of a total of this many. And there's 2 that are not available and 33 that are available. And this is real-time data that is screen scraped from our LS. So this is sort of where the idea that we got the number of laptops available is from the Burritt Library in Central Connecticut State University. And I saw this on the Code for Lib journal, which I thought was a really great idea. So I imagine the loans counter would have a lot of questions of when people are coming by and say, well, is there a laptop available? Because I've seen on occasion, there being a line at the counter people waiting for a laptop to be returned. Todd?
So I'll go more into depth, a little bit about library hours. Most of the time you think you're going to write an API, it'll be for library data, books and journals and things, but it turns out library hours for us are quite complicated. Building hours, kind of places within the building. It actually turned into a strange database. And for the longest time, I've always been putting API-ish things on software that I've written. But until now, we haven't actually exposed that to the rest of the library. Turns out it's things that I have typically used for myself. And often when I write something, there'll be what I write. And a couple weeks later, someone will come and say, can I put this data over here in Drupal, or can I put it somewhere else? And because I've usually written an API-ish thing already, it hasn't been a big deal. But this was a good chance to expose that to everyone else. So the library hours, we moved it to a database, which was a big, interesting job. And then we started using that in the library. So the main display of our, well, you want to see what there? This is what our hours used to look like. And it went on for, maybe 3 or 4 more pages down. Yeah, it was painful. And this was hand-maintained. And each of the libraries also like to display these hours on their homepage. So we had copies of that around. And we probably had 20 places in our websites where hours of various kinds were displayed. But it was all hand done, and people had to remember to do it every time and change each one. So we moved it to a database and stuck the API on there. And I started writing little widgets that go into Drupal so people could pull the main hours listing. They could pull a summary of it. Just, is this building open? Until when? That kind of thing. And when we did this and exposed it, we got interesting feedback from other people in the library, other developers who aren't doing the same kind of thing that Calvin and I are doing, but are more like technicians who deal with desktop machines or are system administrators. And so I said, hey, look, we have all this hours data. What would you do with that? Can you do anything interesting? So one of the other developers was like, yeah, we have room booking software, but right now the room booking software doesn't know when we're open. So you can go in and book a room for 1 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. But you can't go to that room at 1 o'clock in the morning, so it's kind of useless. So we will be tying into this, hopefully, so that the room booking software will limit you to booking rooms when they're actually available. And then our technicians, the big ones were when we're doing server updates and taking care of desktop changes and things like that. And they're like, well, we can use the hours database so that the machines shut down at night when we close. And we can decide not to turn them on when we're closed because it's a holiday. Or we can schedule server updates for times when we're closed and it's not going to actually impact anyone. And before, these had to be hand scheduled, but now we have people who will write scripts to do that, so things will happen automatically. And we're in the middle of a big change in the library in terms of space. There's a big renovation going on, and we will be getting a lot more digital signage. So one of the other things we'll plan to do is be able to pull hours into the digital signage so you can walk in and the library is closing in 5 minutes. Please leave. Get out. So this is what our hours look like now on the home page, the main display, which is quite a bit more readable, I hope, than the other one. And that's just the main display of it, but it shows up in a lot of other places. Like the hours on the home page are pulled from the same API. So you only have to change it in one place. And maybe. And it shows up in the top right there for the Fraser library, all being pulled from the same place. So we only have to change it in one place now rather than 100 different places. So we started going through what else can we API. We already had a system for doing patron data. That was in its own little thing sitting away that nobody really knew about that tied into the IT services used. So I've pulled that into the API. Book and journal covers, one comes from Bowker's, I think, and one comes from Syndetics. But the end user or people using that don't really need to know where we're getting that from. So I pulled that into the API, and there's one place to go now if you want to get book and journal covers. Course names and lookups. IT services for us started providing a feed from them, an API from them of our courses. And it was useful for us in validating courses. We have places where you have to enter what is this reserve item for? And depending on the staff member who entered that, it would be in a variety of formats, from the correct course name to some other variation that they thought was a valid course name, and rarely was. So now we can pull in from the API a list of the courses, we can validate that and make sure that they are actually assigning them course names that exist. And library search. So bento box searches. This seems to be the big thing now. I will show that off in a minute. But when you have APIs for everything, it makes doing things like a quick bento box search quick. When your web librarian sits down and says, by the end of summer, we would really like to fix the searching because we know on our web page or on our home page that people type their search into the first box they see, about 10 times more than any other box on the screen. So let's stop making them pick which box to search, and we'll do a bento box search. Can you get that done by the end of summer, please? And the answer was yes, because there is APIs for a lot of that data. We use Summon for quite a bit of that, and again, I had written little APIs into cuffs for pulling journal information, and what else comes out of cuffs? ERM information for databases. And our main website is Drupal, and it had already been pushing things into Solr. So we had an API for searching the website. And it was fairly easy to get a big bento box search running in a month and pushed out. And it's been highly successful for us. So what went into our API? We wanted it to be modular so that working on one piece of the API wasn't going to break another one. It's fairly easy to drop something into the API. You follow a template. And for the most part, it is just packaging up data that's already there and making it into a easy-to-use interface and dropping it into the interface that Calvin showed off that makes it fairly easy to browse and get inline documentation. Instead of having all of our APIs scattered around a variety of services, now they're all in one place. And with the documentation, we can go to IT services and say, go look at our API, it's documented. You can see what you can do with it rather than them having to come and ask us for things. Part of having the documentation is in line with the code, which means we can do things like auto-generate test forms, and that's been really helpful for breaking it and seeing when you screwed up. You can actually go and test it. And you can make it language independent. So most of it spits out JSON these days, but could easily spit out XML. It's just a view on the data. So IT services for us likes to work in XML. They're slowly switching over to JSON, I think, for a lot of things, but we can provide either one. So things to think about when you're writing an API. This should probably be called things that I did not think about when writing an API. Yeah. So authentication, we didn't really think about that. We're just presenting data. Who needs to authenticate the hours, right? Who cares about that? And then someone said, why don't we put the patron data in there? Oh, wait. Guess we shouldn't give that out to everyone with no authentication. So we haven't really solved that one yet. I'll have to write something for authenticating that. Right now it's just IP limited. What about versioning when we want to change things in a year? Whoops. Yeah, we should probably have a plan for that too. Don't yet. It's coming. This one I did fairly well, providing formatted strings and raw data. So things like date formats provided in a timestamp format that the consumer can parse in and then dump out however they like in terms of date formats. But also provide standardized formatted dates in strings already. Because a lot of the time you don't have people consuming this that actually care about timestamps. They just want to show the date. And if you provide it in a standard format and they use that, then your dates all look the same across everywhere it's being used, which can be handy. People like things in the same format. Otherwise, I get asked to change them. And what we haven't gone to, read-only, or are we going to write an API that lets you actually change the data? Right now, it's spitting out read-only stuff, data we already have. Are we going to make it a writing API? Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Depends if we continue this after the Access talk or not. I'm not sure. Not really sure where this is going. Yeah. Next year I'll present on the writing part maybe. We'll see. So some pros on doing an API. One place for our documentation and access, where before it was scattered everywhere. It really simplifies the programming for end use. Things like the patron data that is being screen scraped from I'm not supposed to say what we have, is being screen scraped from some unknown ILS. Everywhere that we wanted to use patron data, we had to have code that knew how to go and screen scrape it.
There's an API for...
Yeah, but it's horrible, yeah. And it's not very pretty.
It's scraping HTML. It gives you back HTML.
Yeah.
It brings back HTML. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that.
Yeah. So there is, sort of an API for that, but you need to know, how to scrape that, and really it's pretty ugly. So we had code scattered around, various versions that all of us had written to scrape this stuff. So that's simplified now. You go through the API, you get JSON back in one place. We don't really need other libraries to do screen scraping and things like that, because JSON is extremely easy to consume in pretty much every language. One of the more interesting things, you can combine data. So what did I have for a good example? Oh, the workshops, yeah. So for our workshops, we have a tool that ends in Drupal and lets you create a library workshop. But we also have another tool that is the room booking software for staff to use, and some of them put workshops in there. And somebody came to me and said, can we just show all of our workshops in one list? And at that time the answer was no, because they're coming from two different places. So what I did with the workshop API is actually combine that data and merge it into one list. So we can present that without really having to know, is it a workshop from this tool or is it a workshop from this room booking software? It doesn't really matter to the end user. The other thing it can do is future-proof you from back-end changes. So covers is a good example. Right now we get them from Syndetics or Bowkers, and we show covers in a variety of places. If we changed to somebody else for one of those services, we would have to go to every place that those journal covers are used and change how those URLs are created. Where with the API now, we can change it in one place. We can go into the API, change that back end, point it at something else, and our front end services don't need to know what's changed there. That's a simple example, but it goes to other things like if I do change the workshops tool, we can be kind of future-proofed from that. And we have a little bit better control of failure states. So when you're doing things like screen scraping and other things like that, where there is a chance of it failing in a variety of painful ways, the API service can deal with that and time out in a controlled manner and present an error message that actually makes sense to people. So are there cons? There's probably another page worth here that I haven't thought of yet, and I won't find out until we actually use it. I'm sure you guys can throw some at me. One of the cons, a single point of failure. Right now, if one of our services fails, it'll fail in just that place. If the workshop tools goes down, then our workshop list goes down, and it's not a huge deal. If the API service fails, now a lot of things break. Is that a bad thing? Maybe. It just means that I'm more likely to fix it faster. So there's maybe a pro to that one too, I'm not sure. And the other big one is losing some native features in terms of if you're putting an API over something like Solar and you're not exposing the full power that's behind it, then maybe you're not leveraging the full power of these tools that you have. There's a flip side to that one too, in that some of the tools we have quite complex interfaces that people would have to learn, where the API maybe simplifies that to just the cases that we're really concerned about. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. I'm not really sure how that one's going to play out in the long run, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'll do a couple live.
So this is our bento box search that I wrote last summer. It is all API based. Electronic journals comes out of Cuffs. Journal articles is a pre-faceted list coming out of Summon. Same thing with newspapers, same thing with books, which interestingly ties into what Andrew was talking about in terms of if you looked at his content types, it actually, in the new interface, it happens to be split into those three, which is what we found people were interested in as well. Summit is our IR, I think, yeah. That has a painful API that I will probably write something better. Oh, is that one Solar? Okay. All right. So I don't have anything. Oh, this one's Content DM, right? The digitized collections? So digitized collections, that's Content DM, and it has a horrible, horrible interface for searching. That's not coming out of this API yet, but I may do that unless we can get rid of Content DM before I get to that. We'll see. Yeah. Maybe we'll do that instead. Or websites. No, we don't have anything there. How about lockers? Oh, and I can spell. So yeah, did you mean stuff? This is actually Bing's API for did you mean. So one more API there, and I did actually mean lockers. So library information and FAQs, those are both coming out of Solar. And course reserves is what Calvin was talking about. That's coming out of our API now. And that's about it. So yeah, with an API you can build something like, or a lot of APIs, you can build something like that in a very short period of time with very little code. The back end for this is, each one of those boxes is maybe 20 or 30 lines of code to get running. And the bulk of this is presentation and JavaScript to stick everything in boxes and make it pretty and do responsive stuff, which I can't demo that, but we'll see. Anyway, I think we're out of time.